A black woman was taken off the guest list at a lavish party just because she didn't match the upscale atmosphere. But minutes later, the entire restaurant went silent. She was the wife of the largest shareholder, and those who discriminated against her, they're about to face the consequences. This isn't just a story about prejudice. It's a lesson in dignity, in justice, and in why you should never judge someone by appearances, especially when they hold the power to bring your entire empire to its knees with a single word. Vanessa Brooks was always on time. She arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a high-neck black dress, elegant and modest, paired with pearl earrings that once belonged to her mother on her wedding day. Tonight was the 18th birthday party of Chloe Randolph, the daughter of one of her husband's biggest business partners. The event was held at Vivra Blanc, a restaurant often chosen by the financial elite to sign deals and show off wealth. Vanessa stepped through the glass doors, poised as always. She was a sociology professor used to speaking in front of hundreds of students, appearing on television, and even debating a mayor during a public forum. But today, as she handed over her invitation, she heard a phrase that felt both familiar and strange. "I'm sorry, your name isn't on the list." She smiled and presented the card with her name printed clearly, Vanessa Brooks. The hostess, a young blonde woman, examined it for a moment, then furrowed her brow and called for the manager. The manager, Stephen, with slicked back hair and a sharp navy suit, arrived holding a tablet. He glanced at the screen, then gave a small shrug. "I'm afraid there may have been a system error, but it looks like the table's already been reassigned." "To whom?" Vanessa asked, her voice calm. "Mrs. Veronica Langley. She arrived earlier, no reservation, but she's a regular at our restaurant," Stephen said. Vanessa looked him straight in the eye. "And I'm not?" Stephen flushed slightly. He glanced around, then smiled, the kind of smile that pretends to be generous. "If you don't mind, we could seat you near the kitchen. Not the most comfortable spot, but it's quiet." Near the kitchen, with the clatter of pots and the smell of hot grease, Vanessa took a deep breath. She knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't a mix-up. This was a social arrangement. The very kind she lectured about in her classes, now unfolding before her in full color and cold precision. She didn't raise her voice. She simply pulled out her phone, opened her contacts, and tapped a familiar number. "Chris, I need you at Monarch Bay. Right now." No one around her seemed to realize that Christopher Brooks, the man she just called, wasn't just her husband. He was the largest shareholder of Monarch Bay. People were used to seeing black women as uninvited guests. But today, someone showed up, and they were about to regret forgetting her name. Vanessa hadn't even hung up when the sharp sound of polished leather shoes echoed behind the reception desk. Before Stephen or the blonde hostess could react, a tall man in a tailored light gray suit walked into the lobby. The lights caught the glint of a Rolex on his wrist, and his stern expression made the whole room pause for a beat. Christopher Brooks didn't need an introduction. One look from him, and there was no doubt who he was. In the world of finance, that face had graced the cover of Forbes. He was known as the Wall Street shark with the heart of a teacher. "My wife's name isn't on the list?" Chris asked, voice calm but heavy like a judge's gavel. Stephen swallowed hard. We were told that the table had been reassigned to another VIP guest. It might have been a system error. I wasn't aware." "That's strange," Chris said, tilting his head, "because I checked the system log 10 minutes ago." He pulled out his phone and opened an internal app. The screen showed the reservation record. Vanessa Brooks, table 6, confirmed at 10:02 a.m., but then a suspicious edit, 12:17 p.m., the name changed to Chloe Winslow. Vanessa looked at Stephen. "That happened after I arrived." Stephen's face turned pale. "It must have been some kind of mix-up." "No, it wasn't," Chris cut in. "I've suspected this for a while. This isn't the first time." He turned to Vanessa, his gaze softening. "I've heard stories. 3 other partners brought their black wives here and were turned away. I didn't want to believe it. Now I've seen it for myself." The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly. Nearby guests began to pay attention. A young man at the next table discreetly started recording with his phone. The blonde hostess whispered something into her radio. Stephen stammered, "Mr. Brooks, I had no idea she was your wife. If I'd known none of this..." "Wrong," Chris cut him off, his eyes sharp. You didn't need to know she's my wife. You just needed to know she's a person. He stepped forward, locking eyes with Stephen. And as of this moment, you are no longer the manager here. Everything froze. Stephen's eyes widened in disbelief. Chris turned to Vanessa. Do you want to leave? Vanessa shook her head. No, I want the table I reserved. Table 6. Chris nodded, then addressed a stunned server nearby. Set table 6, right now. Table 6 was reset in under 3 minutes. Crystal glasses, polished silverware, and neatly folded napkins were placed with care. Vanessa sat down with an uncanny calm, though her eyes scanned the room, quietly memorizing every face. Chris didn't sit right away. He pulled a slim laptop from his leather briefcase and set it on the table. After powering it on, he logged into Vivra Blanc's internal system, where he was still a majority shareholder, thanks to an investment he'd made 2 years ago. A silent stake, as he used to call it. What are you doing? Vanessa asked softly, leaning toward him, making some noise. With just a few keystrokes, a data file opened, a report of reservation changes from the past 6 months. Chris navigated to a specific list, same-day name edits or cancellations. His voice dropped. 23 cases. 17 of them were black women. Every one of them had their reservation name changed just hours before dinner. And guess who got their tables instead? Vanessa fell silent. Her eyes traced the names. Tasha Williams, Lynette Harmon, Davina Rose, Keisha Lambert. Each name held an untold story, a presence erased because they didn't fit the image this restaurant wanted to uphold. Chris continued, turning the screen toward Vanessa. And the person approving every single one of those changes? Always the same name. Stephen. A wave of silence rippled through the room. A few diners started whispering. Then, a middle-aged woman with warm brown skin stepped closer to their table. She spoke quietly. I'm Keisha. They turned me away here 3 months ago, told me I had the wrong day, but I knew I booked it right. Thank you, both of you. Vanessa offered a soft smile. You didn't get it wrong. Chris stood up. No microphone needed, but his voice carried. I'm Christopher Brooks. I invested $22 million to rebuild Vivra Blanc. I didn't do it to create a restaurant that turns people away based on who they are. Starting today, change begins right here. Just then, a side door opened. A young man in restaurant uniform stepped inside. He stood tall, gaze steady. I'm Marcus. I used to be an assistant manager here. Got reassigned to the kitchen after I spoke up about the way black guests were treated. Chris looked at him and nodded. I want you at the next executive meeting. Vanessa looked at Chris, and for the first time that evening, she smiled. Genuinely. And here I thought this was just going to be a regular dinner. The door swung open again. An aide walked in and leaned close to Chris, whispering something in his ear. Chris gave a small nod, then turned to Vanessa. You'll want to hear this. CNN just called. They want to interview you at noon. Vanessa smiled. Good. They should know this was never just about a dinner table. This was about being seen. Vanessa sat in front of the camera in CNN's sleek New York studio. She had been invited onto Morning Current, a show typically reserved for political figures or those at the center of national outrage. That morning, Vanessa was both. The host, Cheryl Matthews, a seasoned black journalist with sharp eyes and a steady compassion, began with a short question, one that carried a heavy weight. Ms. Vanessa, what hurt the most that night? Being denied a seat or the way everyone acted like it was normal? Vanessa looked straight into the camera. No hesitation. Both. But what kept me up that night was the look in the young hostess's eyes. She looked at me like I didn't belong, not because I was dressed poorly or acting rude, but simply because I was me. Cheryl nodded softly, then shifted to a slide showing the reservation record under the name Veronica Langley, evidence Chris had provided earlier. All of America was now witnessing a quiet act of erasure, masked under the guise of standard procedure. Less than 10 minutes after the segment aired from California to Boston, a wave of comments flooded Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The hashtag #IWasErased2 began trending everywhere. A woman in Atlanta shared that she was once asked to wait an extra 40 minutes despite having a reservation, only to watch another group be seated at her table. A man in Chicago said his 72-year-old mother was told, "We canceled your reservation because we couldn't verify your phone number," even though the confirmation text was still on her phone. Within just 4 hours, over 8,000 posts poured in describing instances of being denied service or having reservations erased without explanation, mostly involving upscale restaurants, spas, and hotels. CNN invited Vanessa back that evening on Prime Perspective. This time she wasn't alone. Chris and Marcus sat on either side of her, and behind the scenes stood Isaiah, the young server whose talent had once been dismissed, now newly appointed as Vivra Blanc's director of guest relations. Vanessa didn't open with her own story. She started with a message from a 13-year-old girl named Talia in New Orleans. Ms. Vanessa, today I wasn't scared to speak up in class when the teacher asked for opinions, because I saw you do it on TV. Everything suddenly felt personal, emotional, real. It wasn't just about the right to dine. It was about the right to exist, to be respected, to be seen. And that's when the right to be seen movement was born. Not from a strategic plan, but from hearts that had once been overlooked, now beating in unison. On Monday morning, the atmosphere at Chris's Manhattan headquarters was anything but routine. A crowd of reporters packed the front lobby, holding up microphones and cameras. They weren't there for a financial update or a merger announcement. They were waiting for Christopher Brooks's first public statement since the Vivra Blanc controversy broke. Chris stepped out hand in hand with Vanessa. Flashbulbs fired, but neither flinched. Isaiah followed close behind. C.B. Grays is carrying a thick folder and a red-labeled action plan titled Operation Guest Light, a nationwide campaign demanding transparency and fairness for customers across America. Chris began in a calm but commanding voice. No one has the right to erase a person from a public space simply because they don't match the image you're used to. Today, we're launching the Guest Light Initiative with 3 specific goals. He raised his hand and signaled for Isaiah to take the podium. Isaiah stepped forward and brought up the first slide on the massive LED screen. 1. Transparent reservation system. Complete edit history, publicly accessible. No more vanishing names. Guests will be able to track every step of their reservation process, who made changes, when, and why. 2. Anonymous feedback from customers and staff. Not everyone feels safe speaking up, especially while on the clock. The new platform will allow voice messages, texts, or emails to be submitted without revealing identities. 3. Mandatory anti-bias training on a regular basis. All frontline staff at restaurants, spas, hotels, including security and reception, will undergo comprehensive training on unconscious bias to ensure no one unintentionally harms another through overlooked prejudice. Behind the podium, the screen changed to a simple logo, an empty chair with the words, "Everyone deserves a seat." Within minutes, the hashtag #GuestLight began trending online. By that afternoon, 3 major restaurant chains announced they were joining the initiative. Some did so reluctantly, under media pressure, but a few seemed genuinely committed to change. Meanwhile, Vanessa didn't stay still. She and Isaiah visited every Vivra Blanc location in the area, checking service quality, talking to staff, and listening to the things cameras could never capture. Then came a surprise, a message from someone unexpected. Veronica Langley, the woman who had been seated at the very table where Vanessa's name had been erased. In her message, Veronica asked for a meeting. There was no apology, just one sentence. "I think I was used too. We need to talk." Chris turned to Vanessa. "Do you want to meet her?" Vanessa nodded, her eyes sharp as steel. "If we want to change the system, we need to understand it, even the parts that look like victims." What seemed like the final chapter opened into a new twist, where the truth was no longer black and white and the fight for dignity had only just begun. The small cafe on 73rd Street was unusually quiet that afternoon. Vanessa walked in first, Isaiah following like a protective shadow. Veronica Langley was already seated, no longer wearing a designer dress or luxury shoes, just a woman with tired eyes and lips bare of lipstick. Vanessa pulled out a chair but said nothing. Veronica spoke first. "I didn't come here to apologize," she said, her voice rough, "because I didn't know what I was supposed to apologize for until I saw my name added to the list so easily." Vanessa stared at her. "What do you mean?" Veronica pulled an invitation card from her purse, stamped with the Vivra Blanc logo, and pushed it toward Vanessa. "I got this invitation just 2 hours before the party. No confirmation, no explanation, just a message. There's a seat open at table 3. Please come, Veronica Langley." Vanessa frowned. "And you went without question?" Veronica smirked, but it wasn't a smile. People like me don't usually get invited to places like that. I thought maybe it was a rare chance, but when I saw you being escorted out by security, I started to understand. Isaiah pulled out his phone. Who sent the invitation? The name hit the table like a hammer. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. Steven, the restaurant manager? Veronica nodded. But I dug deeper. Gareth isn't working alone. There's a group. They call themselves the Table Curation Circle, the ones who decide who deserves to sit at the best tables. Vanessa was stunned. She had thought this was an isolated incident, but it seemed to be a well-organized system. They choose guests based on unspoken criteria: skin color, money, social status, approved looks. Anyone who doesn't fit gets erased from the list or pushed to tables near the kitchen, the bathrooms, or flat out refused. Vanessa clenched her hands tightly. How many other restaurants are involved? Veronica was silent for a moment, then answered, At least 27 restaurants in the Vivra Blanc network and a few other chains. I have names, addresses, and some leaked internal emails. Isaiah looked at Vanessa. We have enough to expand the investigation. Vanessa nodded. This isn't just my fight anymore. She turned to Veronica. Are you willing to be a witness? Veronica took a deep breath. I've lost my reputation already. Maybe it's time to take back my honor. Vanessa reached out her hand. Veronica hesitated for a moment, then shook it. Outside, the season's first snow began to fall, quiet and gentle, but inside that room, a new storm had just begun. 4 days after the meeting with Veronica Langley, Vanessa held in her hands a thick dossier. Leaked emails, guest classification charts based on attractiveness scores, and a list of restaurants involved with the Table Curation Circle. The deeper she dug, the colder it made her. What was happening at Vivra Blanc wasn't an exception. It was the unspoken standard among upscale restaurants. Isaiah, now Vivra Blanc's new director of customer relations, became Vanessa's right hand. They spent nights at her apartment, sorting through data, verifying every case. There were people denied despite having reservations, simply because their companions didn't look right. Black women were moved to tables near the bathrooms because their dresses didn't match the ambiance. Same-sex couples had reservations canceled after the restaurant discovered their relationship was romantic. Vanessa sighed, rubbing her temples. This isn't just discrimination anymore. This is the art of shaping social presence. Isaiah nodded, his eyes thoughtful. A form of casting, like everyone who sits down has to pass the audition. True to her word, Veronica provided info on 3 members of the circle, a PR staffer, an executive assistant, and a regional manager, all with access and authority to edit the reservation lists. Vanessa decided to take the next step. She organized a private meeting in the top-floor conference room of Vivra Blanc, the very place where selective guest receptions were once held. 13 people were invited. They were victims, those who had been refused, demoted, insulted, or ignored for not being system-approved. An elderly woman, a former teacher, broke down in tears. I thought I wasn't fancy enough to have a decent dinner, but it turns out that wasn't my fault. It was theirs. An Asian entrepreneur who had her table changed at the last minute simply because she came with her mother, an elderly woman wearing a plain blouse, quietly said, "They don't erase us. They never acknowledged our presence to begin with." Vanessa stood up, her voice calm but firm. We're not here to reclaim a table. We're here to reclaim the right to enter, no matter what form we come in. Isaiah projected a map showing the 27 implicated partner restaurants alongside the operational model of the circle. Everyone fell silent, but their eyes had changed. No longer fear, readiness. Vanessa took a deep breath. Tomorrow, I go public. No longer a professor, no longer a billionaire's wife, just Vanessa Moore, someone who was erased from the list because of her skin color. And I will not leave this room until no one is excluded from the dinner table simply for not fitting the taste. In the once exclusive room reserved for the chosen, a unified voice rose, those who had been pushed outside the frame. And this time, they were the ones controlling the camera. 9 a.m. the next morning. The 14th floor conference room at Vivra Group was packed. Pristine white curtains were drawn shut, casting a dim light over faces trying to mask their anxiety. At the head of the table, Vanessa sat upright, hands lightly clasped before her. She was no longer the humiliated guest from last night. She was a woman leading a small revolution. Chris entered with Marcus, both calm yet radiating a sharp intensity. They didn't sit immediately. Moments later, Stephen, Vivra Blanc's operations manager, walked in. White shirt, black tie, but his pale complexion suggested he already knew what awaited him. Chris didn't start with greetings, but with data. He clicked the remote, and a large screen lit up behind him. In the past 6 months, 17 customers of color, mostly women, had their names removed from reservation lists just hours before arrival. Meanwhile, their replacements all fit the same profile: white, high status, or socially connected. Stephen cleared his throat, struggling to keep composure. I was just following the policy of selecting customers who fit the brand experience. Vanessa chuckled softly, but her eyes were razor sharp. You define fit by skin color? Marcus stood up, placing his hand firmly on the table. I submitted 3 reports about this issue over the past year. All 3 disappeared from the internal system. The week after, I was demoted from management to dishwashing. Chris crossed his arms. And who signed off on that decision? The screen changed slides. The transfer order appeared with the final approver's name, CFO Pamela Crane. The room fell silent. Pamela, a middle-aged woman in a charcoal gray suit, shrank into her chair. She hadn't spoken a word since the meeting began. Vanessa turned to look directly at her, voice low but clear. We thought Stephen was the problem, but it turns out he was just following orders. Chris scanned the room, then declared, I am demanding the immediate suspension of both Stephen and Pamela until the internal investigation is complete. Additionally, I will convene an independent review board to examine discrimination policies at Vivra Group. No one objected. No one dared. Stephen hung his head. Pamela pulled out her phone, but Chris continued, Don't call your lawyer. You're fired. Effective immediately. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Vanessa stood up, surveying the entire table. We're not here to demand apologies. We're here to make sure this never happens again, and we will not back down. 1 month later, Vivra Blanc had been completely transformed. No longer just a luxury restaurant with elegant design, it had become a symbol of change in the high-end service industry. Vanessa had become the face of the #a seat at the table movement. She was no longer the person erased from the guest list, but the one deciding who would sit at table 3, the historic table that once symbolized exclusion. Vivra Blanc announced a transparent reservation policy. Every customer had the right to check and confirm their seating through a public online system. They held workshops training staff on social equity and cultural diversity, with Isaiah promoted to Director of Customer Relations, representing those who had once been overlooked. At the restaurant's grand reopening ceremony, Vanessa stood before a diverse crowd, ranging from those previously rejected to social activists, and even some who had once doubted her. Her voice was warm, yet passionate. The right to be present is not a gift granted by anyone. It is a fundamental right for every person, no matter who you are, how you look, or where you come from. Veronica Langley, once a symbol of discrimination, now stood beside Vanessa with a genuine smile. I've learned that the beauty of a space doesn't come from superficial selection, but from sincerity and respect for everyone. Chris, her husband, who had always stood behind her, held Vanessa's hand, his eyes full of pride. Vanessa's story inspired many others to stand up. A wave of restaurant chains, hotels, and spas nationwide began reviewing their policies. The #seat at the table movement spread far beyond dining. It became about the right to exist, to be seen, and to be respected. Vanessa remembered the early days standing outside Vivra Blanc, being sent to sit near the kitchen, pushed to the margins of society. But now she stood in the bright spotlight, not as a victim, but as a guide. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and felt the rhythm of life around her. Every laugh, every respectful glance, every shared story was proof of a world changing. Vanessa whispered to herself, you don't need to be angry to resist. You just need to refuse to stay silent. She stepped down from the stage and wrapped her arms around Isaiah, the companion and colleague who never left her side during the darkest days. Outside, round tables were arranged with space between them, each named after someone who had once been excluded, symbols of the right to sit down, to speak up. Vanessa smiled. We don't need to wait for a miracle. We are the miracle. And under the shimmering lights of Vivra Blanc, the story of a woman erased from the guest list became an immortal anthem for the right to belong, a profound reminder that every person deserves respect, recognition, and love.